Hello everyone, and welcome to the
Saturn Studs Weekly Podcast.
weekly, except for the weeks that it doesn't come out, like last week.
Yes.
I was going to try to think of what number we were on, but I'm far too tired to do that.
It's been a rough couple weeks. As always, I'm Peter.
And I'm Kurt.
And we are your hosts here.
Yes, and we've purposely changed the order of introduction to confuse people.
Totally. You have to shake things up.
You have to keep it different, or else people will get bored.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, big news today, Friday,
The 26th.
the 26th. That is what my computer, calendar, and watch all are telling me. There was a Nintendo Direct focused on new Pokemon, and it was confirmed after the leak earlier in the week. I saw it yesterday, so I'm not sure how long it was out there, but it wasn't out there for too terribly long. Pokemon Sun and Moon will be your 7th generation entries into the Pokemon main series. Now, I have not seen any of the minute footage.
Well, Lunatone and Solrock are definitely confirmed.
You would think so.
We would hope so.
Oh god, what if that's like... No, they wouldn't do
Mega
that.
Lunatone?
Yeah,
Mega
there's going to be mega evolutions for them. Or like some new form. Because my mind, when you said that, immediately went to like, oh, what if they made him like one of the legendaries for that generation? I'm like, no, that's stupid, because they're both booty.
Is there any redeeming qualities to either of them?
Very unique typing for Lunatone.
Yeah.
Brock Psychic, there's not too many of that. They're good. I think Lunatone's pretty good in... I think it's PU. I think Lunatone's PU, and it's pretty good in that because of its typing. But, no, for the most part, there are very few redeeming qualities, and they're not the most popular Pokemon designs that have ever been.
Mm-hmm. I remember plowing through them a lot in Gen 3.
Oh my god, in Gen 6, that one freaking cave in Kalos, it's just nothing but Solrocks or Lunatones, depending upon your version. And, God, they're just... Because at that point in the game, I don't have anything that's super effective against Lunatone's typing. So it's just a grind, because it's got high defense, and Rock resists a fair number of things. The thing about Rock that always bugged me is that it's supposed to be a defensive type, but it's weak to so many common attacking types. It's weak to fighting, and ground, and ice,
Come on,
and
Game
grass.
Freak. Yikes. Oh, Game Freak, plan this stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of fixed it when they put out Steel. They're like, this is what we kind of wanted Rock to be, and it's Steel. Steel kind of got worse in Gen 6 because it doesn't resist Ghost or Dark anymore.
Oh, Steel resisted Ghost?
Yeah, until Generation 6 it resisted
jeez.
Ghost and Dark. Yeah, it resisted pretty much everything except what it didn't.
Right.
Which would have been water, ground, fighting, and fire.
Yep.
And fighting, fire, and ground were the only ones that were super effective. Water was neutral.
Right, I remember that. Yeah.
However, many of the early Steel types were part ground, which confused me for many years. I believed that Steel was in fact weak to water. It was not.
Nope. Wait, so you said Steel was weak to ice, right?
Steel is not weak to ice. Rock
Okay.
is weak to ice.
Rock, okay. Ground is also weak to ice? Ground
Yes.
is... Okay.
Is Rock weak? I gotta make sure I'm not putting out false information here.
Yeah.
For as long as I've played Pokemon, and competitively, I am terrible with the type chart.
Oh, yeah. Once you get past, like, the obvious ones, like, some of the fighting, like...
I know that, like,
interactions-
fighting and ground are pretty much stab against everything. Super effective. Like, they are far and away the best offensive types. Ground more so than fighting.
Right.
Flying is, like, the hard counter to both those types. So, let's see. Rock is weak against fire. Wait, no, that's what it resists. Well, rock is weak against fighting, grass, ground, and
that's Gen
water.
1.
Oh yeah, that's Gen 1. Yeah, that didn't seem
Gen
right.
2
Still
onwards.
water. I didn't think rock was weak against water.
Well, it makes sense. Water, road is rock.
Yeah. So I guess it's ice, not water, or water, not ice. Yeah.
So that ground addition to a lot of the steel types really didn't.
No, it didn't do
help.
them any favors. Ground is a super strong offensive type, but a terrible defensive type. Like, it doesn't have a ton of weaknesses, but it only has 2 resistances and 1 immunity.
Right. Makes things tough to kind of build around.
Electric is one of the, most underrated defensive types in my opinion, because it only has 1 weakness, and that's ground. So, if ever there were an electric Pokemon with Levitate, which I'm sure there is, because Electros is a thing, and he's an electric Pokemon with Levitate.
Magnezone, all by
no
steel.
Weaknesses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Electros has no weakness. Makes up for it by being not great in every other area. But it still is a force in RU. It's pretty good with slapping Assault Vest on it. It's pretty bulky. Can do some things. Learns Volt Switch.
Yep. Speaking of competitive Pokemon, are we gonna publish the audio tomorrow?
Yeah, I can try to get it out quick.
So it doesn't have to be tomorrow. I mean, I didn't mean tomorrow.
Yeah.
But what's happening is our college is having a local everyone take on all comers Pokemon tournament with some of the weirdest tournament type rules that we've seen.
Yeah, it's
So the first Swiss is until the semifinals, I think. It's teams of 3 with 1 OU allowed.
no megas. Or was it 1 mega? I think it was no megas, 1 OU. 1 Uber. And then my problem with this is, first off, the flyer didn't say, it did not mention Smogon anywhere. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know
if people know
what Smogon is and what an overused Pokemon is. I would assume they would Google it.
Right. If you don't know, I'll tell you and you can look it up in detail. Smogon is the Pokemon University. Basically, the database for all things competitive about Pokemon.
Yes.
It gives tiers of power for different Pokemon, because different Pokemon can be different strengths, obviously.
Yeah.
There are some that are just better than others.
They are not all created equal.
Right. So they are fit into tiers, and that determines who gets in a tournament or not.
Yeah. The tiers are technically determined based on usage. However, when you kind of follow Smogon, I was on the voting committee for a period. Well, it's not anything impressive. Anyone can do it. You just have to be a certain rank on Pokemon Showdown, and you can vote on bans and stuff. So back when I was playing Showdown a lot, freshman year of college and senior year of high school, when I had time for such hobbies.
No longer.
Yeah. I was high enough ranked to vote on things, and it becomes readily apparent very quickly that it is not based on usage, it is based on power. Because things are banned for being too good. The theory is that if it's too good, it will over-centralize the meta.
Right.
When Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby first came out, when Mega Salamence was legal in OU, horribly centralized metagame. Mm-hmm. Every OU team that wanted to win ran Magnezone and Mega Salamence.
Just degenerated.
Yeah, because you'd use Magnezone to trap your opponent's steel types, which were the only defense against Mega Salamence because it had Aerial Late, which made flying a ridiculously powerful stab for it.
Oh, gross.
Because Aerial 8, it's the same ability Mega Pinsir has, and you've seen how savage Mega Pinsir can be.
Yeah.
But on Salamence, who has much higher base stats. You didn't have to worry about, being locked into Outrage for instance, because of fairies. You're like, that was the balance check in Generation 6 for dragons, even though I really don't think that was necessary. But my thoughts on the fairy type are heavily skewed by my love of the dragon type.
Right.
But anyway, you could run Thrash instead of Outrage on your Mega Salamence, so it would get the Aerial Ape boost and go from normal to flying type. So you would have a higher power version of Outrage that wasn't like nothing was immune to it. There were some things that resisted, sure, but it still hurt a lot.
Sounds like a quad laser. Just...
Yeah, it tore through OU like a quad laser. That was one of the quickest bans I ever remember. The only ban quicker... Well, actually, it wasn't that quick, because people didn't know what to do about it for the longest time, was Mega Rayquaza. Mega Rayquaza just broke the game and everything. Because, first off, let me explain Mega Rayquaza to some of you who might not be aware. Mega Rayquaza is a Mega Evolution of Rayquaza, as you would probably assume. And since Rayquaza has 680 base stat total to begin with, and Mega Evolution boosts base stat total by a total of 100, it became tied with Mega Mewtwo versions for the highest base stat total Pokemon ever. But unlike the Mega Mewtwo versions, it got stats only where it needed them to be beneficial. They only went into its attacking stats and speed, and like maybe a little bit of HP.
So they made a Mega Evolution with huge stats, and then they pushed it?
It gets worse. Mega Rayquaza does not need a Mega Stone to evolve. It just needs to know the move Dragon Ascent.
Oh my God.
You can run Life Orb on your Mega Rayquaza. As if it didn't do high enough damage as it was. Mega Rayquaza. First let me read off the stats for regular Rayquaza for comparison. Regular Rayquaza. HP 105, attack 150, defense 90, special attack 150, special defense 90, speed 95. That's pretty good as it is. Mega Rayquaza, HP 105, attack 180, defense 100, special attack 180, special defense 100, speed 115. So it got the speed creep it needed, so you pretty much outspeed anything you need, as long as it has Dragon Dance on it. And you know what? If you wanted to, you could Scarf it. If it wasn't fast enough for you, you could put a Choice Scarf on it.
Oh, God.
You could put a Choice Band on it. You can... Any of the items that, like, would make you consider not running Mega Evolution. Like, for Mega Mewtwo Y, I didn't see a lot of play because it did, once you factored in everything, it did, like, regular Mewtwo with Life Orb did more damage.
Right.
And, Mega Caesar, for, like, attacking sets, lost out in damage to, like, Life Orb or Choice Band regular Caesar.
Right.
You don't have to make that choice with Mega Rayquaza.
It has been made for you.
You can have both. You can truly have it all. And because of this, it was too good for Ubers.
Oh, God.
So it was decided to make a tier of competitive play called Anything Goes.
AKA the Rayquaza meta.
Pretty much. And I don't remember the specifics of, like, what clauses are removed in Anything Goes. I think there's still Sleep Clause, but, like, Moody isn't banned anymore. Like, all sorts of ridiculous stuff. Just so, like, you can have a prayer of, like, balancing around Mega Rayquaza. It was pretty dumb, yeah. Yeah. Just I don't remember if it was revealed first or not, but I first came into, like, became aware of Mega Salamence, and I'm like, well, that's, like, the most broken Mega Evolution I've ever seen.
Little did you know.
Then Mega Rayquaza came to my attention, I'm like, changed my mind. That's the most broken. Like, even before I knew it didn't need a Mega Stone, I thought it was, like, the most broken thing ever, because it had such ridiculously high attacking stats. The only attacking stats higher than that are on the Mega Mewtwo's, and Mega Mewtwo X has an attack of 194 and Mega Mewtwo Y has a special attack of 194. But Mega Rayquaza only loses 14 base stats on the max, and it has it in both attack and special attack.
So it just becomes
so it's the best mixed attacker ever.
Why would you run anything else?
Why would you even have... Because, when you can run items on it, so you're like, okay, it's a Mega Rayquaza. It has to know Dragon Descent. That's a physical move. But maybe he's running a Choice Spec set, and he's gonna frickin', I don't know, Dragon Pulse me for ridiculous damage that I didn't see coming because I switched in my physical walls, expecting the Dragon Descent.
OHKO Town, everywhere.
Yeah.
So, that was our sidetrack.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. Like, we will be ready for this, for this commenting, even though it might be, as you put it earlier, hot garbage.
Yeah, because I don't...
We can't... So, here's the situation. I'll finish up talking about the tournament. So, the first bunch is 3, and then it goes to teams of 6. Weird.
Yeah.
I think it's just for time. But anyways, no one has any good capture for the 3DSs, so we can't upload any video, and we can't project any video onto any screen that's worthwhile. So what that means, if we are to do our job as commentators, we will do a wonderful over-the-shoulder view.
Yeah, it's going to be.
And you know what that means? Can't actually talk about the strategy because that would be disseminating information to our player.
Yeah.
Who we are currently shadowing.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting experience.
So most of it will probably be the play-by-play. And I don't know, if you're feeling like Super Saiyan, you could rig up like a little graphic with like names and health.
I don't have the time to do that.
Yeah, I would think so. Okay. But you will at the very least, have audio of the play-by-play if you are so inclined to listen.
Yeah. See, I like never have casted before. Like I think out loud when I play Showdown a lot. Like I explain my thought process to myself to reassure myself that I'm not making a stupid decision. And so like when I watch other people play Pokemon competitively, I kind of like go through my thought process. But like I was explaining to Peter, my concern is that like I'll make mention of like the probable reason behind someone making a move, and then that might tip off their opponent to their intention.
Exactly. So we could discuss maybe the general strategies behind some of the choices, but it will be limited.
Yeah, it's going to be a learning experience. Hopefully we're not so bad that they don't ask us back, but...
I don't think that should be a problem, seeing as the person who contacted me about this was basically like, I'm going to be in my own tournament, even though I set all this up. So, can you guys be the master of ceremonies for this thing? I said, okay.
Yeah, and Peter's like, do you want to do this? And I was like, sure, I guess. And this was well before I got slammed with all the work I have in this upcoming few weeks.
Yeah, what's the count been on your...
It only took me 2 hours for the last question of my eyeglass take-home test. So a total of like 8 for the 3 questions.
Yep.
I don't know if I did all the last one right. Like,
that's always a sad feeling.
I don't want to say I cheated, but like I was looking for a heating curve for SLS Collet.
Okay.
Right. And what I had found was an article written about the energy benefits of using Collet in your batching. So they, for this nice composition of container glass, already calculated the kilojoules per kilogram for 100% Collet and no Collet.
Well, isn't that convenient?
So I just used those values and then did like normal enthalpy changes for the silicone, for the SiO2, and the soda ash and calcite.
Right.
And like that was pretty simple I just had to be careful with my heats of fusion for, like, the phase change.
That's
the two
magical.
Of them. So, like, that's not incorrect. I don't know if that's what he's looking for. And the last question was, like, assume a batch composition for the glass in part A, which was the cullet.
Uh-huh.
So I just took the composition from the research paper and used that, and then used their value.
Hey, if it has it in
yeah,
there.
like, I'm just being a good engineer, man. I use my table.
Exactly. What's our time?
Let's see.
We're
20 minutes.
in.
Yeah,
Not too
that's
bad.
fine. We usually spend about that time. So yeah, yeah, and like the only thing about that last question that was a little iffy was, like, for the last part you had to tell if you were using regular batch method or the selective batch method that Dr. Carty helped come up with, because he was not the only author on that paper, and my knowledge of Dr. Carty is he kind of, like, sidles into credit for things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But, like, there was almost no information on, like, energy required to heat things in that article. It was all about batch tree time, and the question pertained to energy. So I didn't know how to answer his question about differences.
So, just kind of...
I just kind of made shit up.
Yeah.
But anyway, we had an interesting op-ed that Peter suggested here. He wanted to talk about the 5th generation of game consoles, which is something that I've exposed myself a lot to. It's not... 5th generation is interesting for me, and I think the reason I became interested in it is because it's the one generation of consoles that I don't own. Like, other than this current gen.
Yeah.
Like, because I've stopped.
Yeah, I haven't played much on those either. So for those who don't know, the 5th generation consists of the N64, the Sega Saturn, and the PS1, and any other peripheral consoles that were floating around during that time.
I don't think they're... Atari Jaguar, maybe?
Maybe. We don't want to talk about the Jaguar.
No one needs to remember the Jaguar. Atari would rather you forget.
Yeah. I mean, with good reason. I'd be fine with forgetting that with them.
Oh my god, I can't believe... I don't know what was 64-bit on that machine, but
Is that the one with the Action 52?
Action 52 was an NES game, I believe.
Okay.
That's
Like...
That's an experience. If you've
Yeah.
never played Action 52.
The Cheetah Man.
It's just all kinds of crazy. So anyway, I guess we should kind of, like... I know most about the Sega Saturn.
I know a little bit about... I can tell you about the N64 and some of the PS1 stuff. Like, I don't know in detail about all these things, but you might not have been around, like, in the personal context of these game consoles, but
Right.
my cousin had an N64 and a Sega Saturn, and we had a PS1, so I've have experience on all of these things.
Yeah. So I guess we should start our story
Yeah, set the stage.
through the eyes of the Sega Saturn, as we are named after it. I remember when I told my friends that I was calling us the Saturn Studs, he's like, why would you name yourself after the worst Sega console? And I was like, we didn't name ourselves after the 32X. So anyway, the year is 1994, I think. Pretty sure. Great year.
Mm-hmm. You know, I was but a twinkle.
Yeah, I was a wee, depending upon the month, I was a wee little lad, or an embryo.
One of the two.
Yeah. So, it's E3, and Sega has the grand honor of leading off the E3 presentations. And it's Sega, the new kid in town, Sony, and then Nintendo.
Right.
So Sony, just a little bit of backstory. Sony had a deal go down with Nintendo. Like, it fell out. They were going to design a disc add-on for the Super Nintendo. And they had the prototype all set up and whatever, but, you know, certain things fell through with certain partners, and then the whole thing was scrapped. but that served as the basis for what would eventually become the PlayStation. So Sega leads off, and they're hot off the heels. Well, no, they've released the Sega CD, and it's not doing great. And I'm not sure if they've yet released the Sega Saturn. I think they've kind of announced, like, people know that the Saturn's coming. Right. They're just not entirely sure when. And I think the 32X comes after the Saturn, because that was like their less expensive entry point to 32-bit gaming. Right. So they come out and they announce the release date for the Sega Saturn, and it catches everyone by surprise, including the people developing shit for the Sega Saturn.
Yeah.
And they announced the price, I think was it was either $299 or $399.
Yeah. As a kind of a general rule, Sega has had a bad track record with announcements.
Yeah.
Like, was it this one or the Dreamcast, which was like announced wicked early?
It was the Saturn, I believe.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, the Sega Saturn was announced to have a price of $399 on launch, which it's a lot of money.
Yeah. Even for then. I mean, especially for then.
I mean, like, well, people, like, we've talked about this before. People don't realize that, like, video games were never cheap. Like, NES games were still, like, $40, $50.
Right.
Like, and the hardware was, like, comparable to what you would pay for a console now. So it's not like, oh, everything's so much more expensive now than it was then.
Haha, no.
That's not at all the case.
It's backwards because we have Steam.
Yeah. So the Sega Saturn was announced for its really early release date that caught everyone by surprise, and it's announced at $399. Now, the theory a lot of people have is that Sony's plan of attack was whatever they announced for the Saturn, $100 less than that for the PlayStation. So Sony comes out, announces the PlayStation, and it's priced at $299.
Oh.
That, like, even as early as that, the Saturn was kind of dead in the water.
Yep. When your competitor can undercut you by 50%.
Yeah. So, that happens, and Nintendo goes out, they announce Ultra 64's in development or whatever. Its architecture is being used to develop Killer Instinct arcade cabinets across the nation. They don't really enter into the story to 96. Now, the Sega Saturn was a very unique piece of hardware. Sega foresaw... Like, Sega didn't read the room the same way that Sony did. Sony felt that the future of gaming was 3D. And
right.
They happened to be correct in that. Sega didn't feel the same way. They thought they were going to make a really super duper powerful 2D console. It was going to be a 2D powerhouse, which the Saturn was. But because they kind of saw the writing on the wall late in the development of the Saturn, they had to like tack on a 3D graphics processor. And because of that, the like design architecture for the Sega Saturn was super complicated. Like, it was really hard to develop for. So they didn't have a lot of third-party support. So that's like strikes 1 and 2.
Right.
And then being priced $100 above your closest competition was strike 3. The Sega Saturn was pretty much out by the time it reached the thing. Which is sad, because it has one of the greatest controllers of all time.
Yeah, and it has some great games.
It does have some great games. You know, your Knights into Dreams and your Panzer Dragoons of the world. And no Sonic title, which also didn't help it.
Yeah.
That was like strike 4, if there is such a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, like the Saturn really struggled. It enjoyed decent success in Japan, but it was pretty much a flop in the US. And Sega was just hemorrhaging money to the point where, like, in 97, at their E3 press conference, like, they had a change of president, and they were like, yeah, the Sega Saturn is not the future here.
We can't make it work. And that's...
Which, you know, dropping a console, support for a console, like, really early on, didn't do Sega any favors, too. And they really needed the Saturn to work because they lost a good amount of money on the 32X and the Sega CD.
Right. That's kind of crazy just to wrap my head around, like, because we live in the time when, like, 2D games and 3D games all fit in their own niche and everything exists kind of peacefully together. But, like, back then, no one had done 3D games that wasn't a gimmick.
Yeah, like the first like real successful 3D game, I would say, would probably be Star Fox.
Right, at least on consoles. I mean, yeah. PC had their shooters.
Yeah, like...
Or was that late? I don't know where that late in the timeline.
I mean, it's around the same time, but back then, like, PC gaming back then wasn't as accessible as it is now. Like, it was... Like, hardware was objectively more expensive. Like, the cost... Like, right now, it's cheaper to build a PC that runs, current-gen games than it is to buy a console.
Right.
Back then, that wasn't the case. It was probably, if not, like, the same price, more expensive, and then you had the... it wasn't as user-friendly, and there wasn't, like...
You had to know about computers to run your game.
Yeah, there wasn't a, unilateral distribution agent like Steam. It was not as great as it is now. So, like, while Doom and Duke Nukem, like, existed, they were kind of like... They weren't really even real 3D. Like, they weren't, like, polygon-based graphics. They were just, like, sprites and with a Z-axis.
Imagine a depth going on there.
It's... Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, if you've ever played Doom or Duke Nukem, you kind of know what I'm talking about.
Look up an image right now, and you will see that it looks 3D. It can function as 3D, but it's essentially flat.
Yeah. So, Sega, like, kind of got dumped on, and the Saturn ultimately failed. But it lived on in the hearts of many for some of its really unique offerings. And its vastly superior ports of arcade games like Capcom Fighters. Talking about the PlayStation.
Well, how about we move into the N64, or do you want to do this chronologically? Because we talked about Star Fox. We'll save that for later. We'll discuss Star Fox and N64
what do you want to say about Star Fox?
Well, you were talking about how it was good 3D. It was the first...
Well, yeah, it was like the first console polygon 3D thing.
That's it.
That's all I got on that, unless you have something.
No, the only thing I have on it is, like, it needed a special VFX chip to run.
So, like, the game cost, like, $80 or something ridiculous like that.
Mm-hmm. And it blew people's minds.
Yeah, it did blow people's minds. And it was well beyond pretty much anything the Genesis had the capability of producing at the time.
Right. But the N64 did not come out right after the Genesis. What did come out at the same time was PlayStation, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah. So the PlayStation and the Saturn launched within a few months of each other. And the PlayStation, because it was less expensive, and because it was on this newfangled 3D thing, and because it was much easier to program for, and had far more third-party support, steamrolled the Saturn. It was not even close. Like, any market share Sega had, like, was instantly claimed by Sony. It was brutal.
They sucked it up.
Yeah. Like, and the PlayStation, to its credit, like, I'm not a huge PS1 knowledgeable person. Mm-hmm. But, I've played Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid, so I've got a handle on things. It has some unique things, like was Crash Bandicoot a launch title?
I'm not sure. It could have been, I feel like. Okay. But I while you can actually look it up if you want to just fact check. But I'll mention this while he's looking that up. The 5th generation was this. It's an interesting intersection because it was coming off of the old idea of video games that you had like your mascot characters that could carry a console and could do all these things, and it was starting to move away from that because you see, as we start having the 3D consoles, there's less and less desire to have one big mascot that kind of represents everything, and it's on that kind of not devolving.
I don't know.
Disagree?
If I disagree with that, but I don't know that like statement is completely reflective of the reality. Like,
right.
I mean, I can see where you're coming from because Crash Bandicoot didn't like last into the PS2 era, and there wasn't a Sonic game on the Saturn. But like, I think the idea at the time was that Crash Bandicoot was going to be the mascot of Sony going forward. Like, that was their answer to Sonic and Mario. And on the N64 side, Mario was still Mario. Like, Mario 64 is what moved units on the N64.
And boy, did it move units.
Yeah, it was pretty ridiculous. But yeah, so, like, Crash Bandicoot and Castlevania Symphony of the Night and Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid, all were like really beyond the scope of what people had imagined video games would become at the time. And I think a lot of it had to do like, I guess we should talk about like, well, no, we'll talk about that when we get past the N64. But like a lot of really innovative like multi-disc games came out on the PlayStation.
Yeah.
Like really ambitious projects because it was easy to code for. It was probably the most powerful console in terms of 3D rendering capabilities amongst the trio. And it had a huge market base because of its super successful launch. So it was kind of like a perfect storm of things for Sony that allowed them to leapfrog Nintendo and Sega into the number one spot.
Yeah, and they've kept that momentum up to this day.
Yeah. If they're not number one, they're at least number two, because there's really only two main games in town.
Yep.
But anyway, let's flash forward a year. It's 1996. The Nintendo 64 dropped on everyone. And it comes with a myriad of hugely influential titles at launch. We talked about Mario 64, which like blew like Crash Bandicoot like introduced the concept of 3D platforming. Mario 64 was like, this is how it's done, son.
Yeah, this is what that's what platforming can be. This is what it will be.
Yeah, this is what Crash Bandicoot. That's cute and all, but this is where the adults come to play their 3D platformers with Mario 64. So that was a huge game. It's considered by many to be like one of the best Mario games and one of the best 3D platformers of all time. And then you had, I believe, same, like within 2 years you had Ocarina of Time drop, which a lot of people wrongly consider to be the greatest game of all time. Sorry, you are incorrect. But it was good. And then you had Star Fox 64, which is probably my favorite on-rail shooter of all time. Even though it's like was exactly Panzer Dragoon.
A little simmer there.
Very similar.
They had Donkey Kong and all of Rareware.
Yeah, you know,
fantastic third-party support.
Yeah, Rare did some amazing things with them.
And they had GoldenEye, which
GoldenEye,
basically
of course, GoldenEye.
It popularized the casual first-person shooter on consoles.
Yeah, I think that really. I'm trying to think
which is
now.
weird because it's Nintendo.
Yeah, other than Nintendo had to take risks back then, you know. Other than Doom, which was on the 32X, I think GoldenEye may have been the first-person shooter, like true 3D first-person shooter
with multiplayer. That's also the key part.
Yeah, it had multiplayer. I mean, I'm not 100% sure on that. Don't take me to the bank on that, but I'm pretty sure that's correct.
Let us know if you disagree.
Yeah. So, I mean, with all that, like, the three consoles couldn't have been any more different. It was really a very interesting dichotomy because I don't think ever in video game history have there been, like, such very different consoles. Like, the PlayStation won handily because I think it had the right stuff for the era. Like, well, the Saturn used CDs as its,
Yep.
storage medium, like the PlayStation. The PlayStation used CDs as well. I think Sony had... I know Sony worked with, like, CDs, like, developing them. I don't know if they were part of the company that invented dual-layer, like, recording discs or not.
But at the very least, Sony...
But they had them. They, came out in Sony's lifetime, which allowed them to, hold the most, game data on a single disc.
And Sony was already, like, a powerhouse of digital media.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not digital media, but, like, electronic media system. Like,
yeah.
They had the Walkman.
Like, media players and all that. They were well known for that. And like we said earlier, the Saturn was, like, the 2D powerhouse. Like, 2D games ran beautifully on that. The PlayStation was not very good with 2D, but was a beast at 3D, which was what, the market shifted toward. Right. And the N64 was decent with 3D and all that. It wasn't, like, as powerful as the PlayStation in that regard. And they stuck with cartridges for whatever reason.
Because they knew that, like, it was iconic. I guess they thought it was, like, an iconic thing that everyone could still, like... You see you had a cartridge and you're like, oh, it's a Nintendo thing. But didn't they not have a... they had a CD later in the...
Yeah,
like,
for
some, like, an
disc
add-on.
drive... The N64DD came out in Japan only and was a miserable failure.
Okay.
But the problem with them continuing to use cartridges was it really limited their storage space. So they couldn't get... Like, Square Enix was a partner of Nintendo's for a long time. That's why all the Final Fantasy games were on the Super Nintendo and the NES and not the Master System or the Genesis. But because of their use of cartridges, Square Enix couldn't put Final Fantasy VII on the N64. It just wasn't possible. So they partnered up with Sony.
And now it's a Sony thing.
And now it's a Sony thing. So they lost a lot of, support there. And they just made a lot of questionable decisions were made with the N64. And I think that really started Nintendo's spiral into being, like, completely reliant on their IPs.
Yeah. As I've heard it being called the Nintendo holding pattern.
Yeah. Like, and they continued it with the GameCube, too. They used the mini DV discs, not, like, full DVDs.
Right.
For whatever reason. And it, again, limited what could be put on there. And since the cost of developing a game on the N64 or the Sega Saturn versus the cost of developing on the PlayStation, it was like no contest. If you're a third-party developer, you want to go on the PlayStation.
Yep.
So unless they were able to broker an exclusive contract, which was expensive, developers went in droves to Sony, and Sony became the dominant force in the market, and they would remain that way until arguably the 7th generation of consoles, when the Xbox 360 kind of
hit the market,
hit the ground running,
made those waves.
Yeah,
and that really is at kind of the core why the 5th generation is so interesting. And
it was such a turning point.
Yeah, it's often overlooked. Like, people remember, like, this, the 3rd generation, the SNES.
Yeah, 3rd generation was NES.
Okay.
Yeah, they remember that because that saved the home video game market. And they remember the brutal console war between the Genesis and the Super Nintendo.
Yes.
Man, like, Peter and I we have a friend who, grew up with the Nintendo systems, and we're like, oh yeah, we came from the other side of the war. Like, we were refugees fleeing a war-torn country. And, Sega was, the number 2, number 1, depending upon how you wanted to view it, thing. And then, in 2 console generations, they were gone. Because Sony just destroyed their souls. Which is why a lot of Sega fans don't like Sony stuff. Because
really, I never
bad
knew
memories.
That.
Yeah, because, like, a lot of people blame the PlayStation for really ruining Sega, and they blame the PlayStation 2 for killing the Dreamcast, which is a valid complaint.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and again, you see this other turning point in the 5th generation, which is other players can play the game.
Yeah.
It's not the Sega Nintendo lock that it was for years.
Yeah, and I'm sure the success of Sony, at least in part, inspired Microsoft to get in on the game. We'll talk about the 6th generation another time, I'm sure, because that's one that's near and dear to my heart.
Yep, that's a lot of the college age kids today. That's their gen.
Yeah, that's what we grew up on. A lot of it. So that's about all I have. I was all shooting off the cuff. I clearly didn't organize any of this beforehand because I've been all over the damn place.
Yep.
But there's a background on the 5th generation of consoles, one of the more interesting ones in history.
Yeah. Okay. So to finish this, I got a challenge for you.
Okay.
Console title tennis. Or video game tennis from the 5th generation. Any 5th generation game, you name it, and then I'll name another one, and we go back and forth till one of us runs dry.
Oh, God. Okay.
I'll give you the first volley. I'm doing Panzer Dragoon.
Metal Gear Solid.
Guardian's Quest.
Star Fox 64.
Donkey Kong Country.
Final Fantasy 7.
Donkey Kong Country 2.
Conker's Bad Fur Day.
Banjo-Kazooie.
Ocarina of Time.
Banjo-Tooie.
Majora's Mask.
Let's see. Nights into Dreams.
Crash Bandicoot.
Thunder Force 4.
Tekken 3.
Final Fantasy 9 or 8. Whichever one had the crystals in. The
8 is a 6th generation game.
Shit.
Dropped on the PS2. I win.
I'm done. I'm out. And that is it for tonight.
Yeah, that's all we got. We're going to try to push this out as quick as we can. Thanks for listening. As always, bye.
Bye.